In this video, I will put the good old Sony RX100 Mark III to the test from today's perspective. Without further ado, let's briefly look at the build quality and ergonomics first. Used materials are very decent, the body is mostly made from aluminum and it seems like we have some good quality plastic on the bottom piece. The LCD panel in itself is respectable and it fully tilts, so you can even take photos of yourself. In addition, you get good quality EVF that's neatly hidden in this camera's body. That feature can be useful in those bright sunny days, and it even has a proximity sensor, so you don't have to press anything to switch it on. I just wish it wouldn't turn off the whole camera every time I'm pushing it back. On the other hand, there is some sacrifice in ergonomics, but it is to be at least partly expected with such compact style camera. The layout and size of a few buttons could be a bit better. More importantly, the lack of feel from the shutter button leaves some disappointment, though you can probably get used to most of that. The menu is what you expect to get from the old Sony camera, no touchscreen or some fancy software features, by the way, not that we have this today. However, the interface feels decently responsive and there are quite a few options to choose from, for example Auto HDR, built-in ND filters or video codec settings. Maybe it's not the most intuitive UI you can find, but I think it's okay. So all things aside, how is the image quality? Well, the slightly bigger sensor advantage is definitely very apparent. The level of detail and overall plasticity of the pictures is much better than in small sensor bridge cameras. Additionally, you get pretty nice bokeh, partly thanks to the bright 24-70 f1.8 to f2.8 aperture lens. Sharpness level also justifies having that size signature on the front. Optics are top-notch, even at wide open at f2 or f2.8, everything stays pretty crisp. This I think they improved compared to the original RX100, which I previously tested, though side-by-side comparison would be needed to precisely determine that. Dynamic range, especially in JPEGs, may not be the best because the camera has a tendency to blow out highlights a bit. But frankly, after some editing in Lightroom, I was able to achieve pretty satisfying results. I also like the color science. The automatic white balance could be a bit better, but again, if you shoot RAW, you can correct all those things in a post-process. So generally, I'm happy with the picture quality. That said, it may not be as good as the compact Panasonic Lumix LX100 Mark II I've lastly tested, though that one is a bit more expensive and it's equipped with a bigger micro 4x3 sensor, so perhaps I shouldn't really mention that. In the end, I think it's safe to say that this is a quite good representation of the compact camera for more demanding users. But the question remains, do you really need a camera like this when we have today's smartphones with all those fancy camera features? To answer that, I will quickly show you a few pictures side by side with the latest iPhone 12. As you can see, both came out looking solid, but if you have a good monitor, I think you can already notice the Sony's 1-inch sensor advantage. It provides with a more natural looking picture that has a bigger amount of detail. If we zoom in on that tree, that looks to be undisputably correct. Less artifacts and more detail compared to the iPhone. On the other hand, the phone can provide with perhaps more appealing out of the camera results. It can be too much of a processing for some of you, but I think as a point-and-shoot it's mostly useful like this. The old Sony just cannot match here. Even if you turn on the HDR mode on the RX100, it simply cannot compare both in terms of strength and speed. But honestly, I could live with all of that. What I really think is superior in the iPhone is vastly better stabilization, and I'm talking both in terms of shooting pictures and videos, and advanced picture stacking. Just take a look at one of the examples showing how difficult it is to get the picture sharp in the low light scenario with the Sony compared to the iPhone. Trust me, it's really hard. Those are the things I miss the most. However, I cannot blame 7-year-old camera. But I don't understand why manufacturers are failing to develop new compact cameras with mentioned features today. But anyway, let's get back to the RX100 Mark III. So I think the larger sensor provides with indisputably more detail and more possibilities in the post-process, though in comparison with smartphones it may perform worse as a standalone point-and-shoot go-to camera. In terms of the autofocus, its speed and accuracy are relatively decent, but if you opt for a serious performance, you should probably look at the RX100 Mark V and up, since that's when they implemented the much faster contrast and phase detect system. Oh, and I would almost forget about the video quality. Well, in short, it's nothing to write home about. 1080p up to 60 frames per second is just too low of a standard nowadays. If you're into videography, the 4K option was introduced in the RX100 Mark IV for the first time, but it isn't a perfect choice either, since the 4K recordings have a time limit of 5 minutes. To unlock the full potential, I think you would need to look up to the latest RX100 Mark VII, or perhaps go with the Sony ZV-1. Let me know how is the audio quality. Sony RX100 Mark III. In conclusion, the Sony RX100 Mark III looks to be an improvement over the original RX100 and is generally a pretty good choice for those of you who want a bit more detail and abilities in the pocket compared to what a smartphone can do. The camera is not that expensive nowadays, especially on the aftermarket, so even if I'm not in its target, I just don't see a reason to not recommend it. If your budget is a bit bigger, I would suggest looking up the Panasonic Lumix LX100 Mark II or Sony RX100 Mark V, for reasons mentioned earlier. But most importantly, let me know your opinion about this camera in the comments below. Thank you very much for watching and see you in the next one. Peace.